ਜਸ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਸਾਰੇ ਦਰਸ਼ਕਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਮੇਰੇ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਪਿਆਰ ਭਰੀ ਸਤਿ ਸ਼੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ। ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ। ਮੈਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਹੋਸਟ ਆਸ਼ਮਿਤਾ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਇਸ ਸ਼ਾਮ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਜਸ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੀ ਲਗਾਤਾਰ ਇਹੀ ਐਫਰਟ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ, ਕੈਨੇਡਾ, UK, ਆਸਟ੍ਰੇਲੀਆ, ਬਾਹਰਲੇ ਮੁਲਕਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਵਸਦੀ ਹੈ, ਜੋ ਵੀ ਕੁਝ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਹੋ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ ਉਹਦੀ ਅਪ ਟੂ ਡੇਟ ਖਬਰ, ਅਪ ਟੂ ਡੇਟ ਜਾਣਕਾਰੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਅਸੀਂ ਸ਼ੇਅਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਿੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਭਾਵੇਂ ਚੰਗਾ ਹੋਵੇ ਭਾਵੇਂ ਮਾੜਾ ਹੋਵੇ, ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਹਰ ਇੱਕ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਹਾਜ਼ਰ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਅਤੇ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਇਸ਼ੂ, ਇੱਕ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੇ ਹਾਦਸੇ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਉਹਦੀ ਯਾਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਰੀਸੈਂਟ ਖਬਰ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈ। 10 ਸਾਲ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਉੱਤੇ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਸਟੇਟਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਬਹੁਤ ਹੀ ਮੈਂ ਕਹਾਂਗੀ ਹਾਰਟ ਬ੍ਰੇਕਿੰਗ ਅਟੈਕ ਹੋਇਆ। 10 ਸਾਲ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਓਕ ਕ੍ਰੀਕ, ਵਿਸਕੌਨਸਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਡਿਸਟਰਬਡ ਅਤੇ ਰੇਸਿਸਟ ਗਨਮੈਨ ਨੇ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਵਾਰ ਕੀਤਾ। 7 ਜਾਨਾਂ ਗਈਆਂ। ਉਸ ਸੰਗਤ ਤੋਂ 7 ਜਾਨਾਂ ਛਿਨੀਆਂ ਗਈਆਂ ਜੋ ਕਿ ਸਿਰਫ ਤਾਂ ਸਿਰਫ ਗੁਰੂ ਦੇ ਘਰ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਸੀ, ਗੁਰੂ ਦਾ ਆਨੰਦ ਲੈਣ ਪਹੁੰਚੇ ਸੀ। ਅਗਸਤ 5, 2012 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇਹ ਹਾਦਸਾ ਹੋਇਆ। ਅਤੇ ਅੱਜ 10 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਓਕ ਕ੍ਰੀਕ ਅਤੇ US ਦੀ ਸਾਰੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੰਗਤ ਇਹੀ ਸਵਾਲ ਪੁੱਛ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਨ 10 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰੈਸ ਹੋਇਆ, ਕੀ ਬਦਲਾਵ ਆਇਆ ਹੈ। ਇੱਕ ਪਾਸੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਉਨ ਵਿਕਟਮਸ ਨੂੰ, ਉਸ ਟ੍ਰੈਜਡੀ ਨੂੰ ਯਾਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਿਹਨੇ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ, ਸਾਡੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰ ਦੇ ਮੈਂਬਰ, ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਮੈਂਬਰ, ਸਾਡੇ ਸੰਗਤ ਦੇ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਲਿੱਤੇ। ਪਰ ਦੂਜੇ ਬੰਨੋਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਇਹ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਸ ਕਾਰਨ ਕਰਕੇ, ਉਸ ਨਫ਼ਰਤ ਕਰਕੇ, ਉਸ ਇਗਨੋਰੈਂਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਅਤੇ ਉਨ ਗਨ ਪੋਲਿਸੀਜ਼ ਕਰਕੇ, ਜਿਨ ਕਾਰਨਾਂ ਕਰਕੇ ਇਹ ਹਾਦਸਾ ਹੋਇਆ, ਉਨ ਏਰੀਆਜ਼ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਇੰਪਰੂਵਮੈਂਟ ਹੋਈ ਹੈ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਕ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ 2 ਪਾਰਟ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ। ਅੱਜ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਝ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਿਨ੍ਹਾਂ ਨੇ ਨਾ ਕਿ ਸਿਰਫ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਦੇ ਇੱਕ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਮੈਮੋਰੀਅਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਬਹੁਤ ਵੱਡਾ ਰੋਲ ਪਲੇ ਕੀਤਾ ਹੈ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਓਕ ਕ੍ਰੀਕ, ਵਿਸਕੌਨਸਨ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੱਲ੍ਹ ਤੋਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਐਤਵਾਰ ਤੱਕ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਬਟ ਇਨ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਨੇ ਯੂਨਾਈਟਿਡ ਸਟੇਟਸ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਿੱਖਾਂ ਦੇ ਹੱਕ ਲਈ ਇੱਕ ਲੜਾਈ ਲੜੀ ਹੈ ਅਤੇ ਲੜ ਵੀ ਰਹੇ ਹੈ, ਬਿਕੋਜ਼ ਇਹ ਜੰਗ ਹਲੇ ਪੂਰੀ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਈ, ਸਾਡਾ ਕੰਮ ਹਲੇ ਪੂਰਾ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੋਇਆ। ਸੋ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਓਕ ਕ੍ਰੀਕ ਨੂੰ ਯਾਦ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਸਾਨੂੰ ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਇਹ ਪੁੱਛਣਾ ਚਾਹੀਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਇਨ 10 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਟ੍ਰੈਜਡੀ ਨੂੰ ਰੋਕਣ ਲਈ, ਭਾਵੇਂ ਉਹ ਸਾਡੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਨਾਲ ਹੋ ਜਾਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਵੀ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ। ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੀ ਸ਼ੁਰੂਆਤ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇੱਕ ਪ੍ਰੀਮੀਅਰ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੰਸਥਾ ਜੁੜ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਹਮੇਸ਼ਾ ਸਾਡੀ ਕੌਮ ਦੇ ਹੱਕਾਂ ਲਈ ਅੱਗੇ ਖੜ ਕੇ ਲੜਾਈ ਲੜਦੀ ਹੈ। ਮੈਨੂੰ ਬਹੁਤ ਖੁਸ਼ੀ ਹੋ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੋਏ ਸਿੱਖ ਕੋਲਿਸ਼ਨ ਤੋਂ ਸਿਮ ਜੇ ਸਿੰਘ। ਸਭ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲੇ ਸਿਮ, ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਵਾਗਤ। ਵੈਲਕਮ ਟੂ ਦਿਸ ਸ਼ੋ। ਸਤਿ ਸ੍ਰੀ ਅਕਾਲ।
Sat Sri Akal, and thank you for having me again, Aashmeeta.
Of course, Sim, it's always a pleasure. Your whole team, the whole Sikh coalition team, you guys are at the forefront of making sure that Sikh civil liberties, whenever they're under attack, are protected, and the areas where we need to do more work are always at the forefront of folks' mind, of their priorities list. And this is not easy work, whether it's legislating on behalf of the community in Washington DC, or like we're going to be seeing this weekend, going all over the country where the community needs a support, an official support system that makes our place in the United States political and civil infrastructure. Once again, so good to have you. You're Senior Policy and Advocacy Manager currently at Sikh Coalition. Once again, anytime your team joins us, it's always a wonderful conversation. But today we're talking about something that is heartbreaking at its core. But maybe there are some lessons that we can learn as we remember the Oak Creek Gurdwara Sahib mass shooting that took place in Wisconsin 10 years ago. Sim, 10 years is a long time. What can you say about the significance of this anniversary and the community coming together 10 years later to remember those victims and that tragedy that befell our Gurdwara Sahib on that day?
You know, it was a tragic day, and I remember exactly where I was when I heard the news 10 years ago. And when I've spoken to so many other community members in the Sangat, they tell me the exact same stories. It was similar to 9/11 for them in remembering the exact moment in time where they were when they saw that heartbreaking news. And Sikhs in Oak Creek and across the nation were devastated that a house of worship, somewhere we gather with loved ones to pray, to sing, to eat, and celebrate, could be subject to such an attack by a white supremacist, people who are filled with hate, against people who are just filled with love. Yeah. And the tragedy also meant that many Americans were learning about who Sikhs were for the first time.
Yeah.
And the Sikh Coalition played a significant role in fielding the media with so many requests to speak and educate the wider general American public about our community, who we are, what we stood for. And we were on the ground for several weeks providing community services, and we helped prepare families for meeting with the First Lady Michelle Obama at the time, performed emergency immigration related work, such as ensuring that there were visas for people to come here for their funeral attendances. Yeah. These are things that we don't want to think about, but unfortunately happen, and organizations like ours are able to assist. And you know, we also saw an immediate need for mental health resources, and so we worked with SALDEF and other organizations who ensured that those resources and gaps could be created. And we created a newly developed organization, the Sikh Healing Collective at the time. And we supported vigils happening everywhere around the country. We saw an outpouring of support from interfaith partners, from other communities. And I think it was a real turning point where, fortunately, we were also able to push the FBI to start tracking anti-Sikh hate crimes, which was never tracked before. And this is something that we've been trying to do for years. It's sad that it took the Oak Creek shooting for that change to finally happen.
Right.
And it's one of those things that I think we see time and time again when other houses of worship get attacked. You know, we've seen in Poway, we've seen in Pittsburgh, we've seen in Charleston, so many minority communities who are facing white supremacist attacks, and just not enough is being done, and we have to do more.
Sim, you brought up a really important point, and we've covered this, in various programs. The FBI's tracking of hate crime data specifically for the Sikh community, and the latest report from last year shows us that proportionate to our population size, Sikhs are facing not just increased, but the highest rate of hate crimes. And such a big credit for that number, that data set goes to exactly what you said. Even putting it on the register, even putting on the map that Sikhs have their own identity and are experiencing their very own form of hatred across the country. A big part of that is the Sangat working with you hand in hand when something happens to them, to get it not just reported appropriately, but then categorized as a hate crime, which takes a significant amount of work in the back end. With law enforcement agencies, we saw that play out in Indianapolis recently with the FedEx shooting. It's an ongoing process. Sim, once again, just to you kind of walk through some of the work that you've done in the time since, but in terms of gun legislation, gun violence, I kind of want to talk to you specifically about what progress we've made in this area, because even though this tragedy happened 10 years ago now, overall the state of the country doesn't seem to have come too far. I mean, just this year, we're only in July, and we've already seen more mass shootings than the days in the year that have passed. Some of the worst, whether it's Uvalde with the children in an elementary school, the Buffalo supermarket, the 4th of July parade in Chicago. These are just the ones that mainstream media has reported. There's countless others that didn't even make it to the airwaves. So I want to talk a little bit about that, because that is what Sikh Coalition does, policy work, especially your area. We're going to stop for a quick break here. Singh from Sikh Coalition, don't go anywhere. Viewers, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੀ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਇਸ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਜੁੜੇ ਰਹੋ। 10 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰੈਸ ਹੋਇਆ ਹੈ ਇਸ ਮੁੱਦੇ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ, ਉਹਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਉਸ ਪਾਰ। ਬ੍ਰੇਕ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਸਵਾਗਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਵੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਹੋ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਅੱਜ ਦਾ ਮੁੱਦਾ। ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਸ ਹਾਦਸੇ ਨੂੰ ਯਾਦ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਜਿਹਨੂੰ 10 ਸਾਲ ਹੋ ਗਏ ਹੈ, ਬਟ ਉਹ ਜ਼ਖਮ ਹਲੇ ਵੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਚੁਭਦਾ ਹੈ। ਸਾਡੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਾ ਕੇ ਅਮਰੀਕਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਫ਼ਰਤ ਦੇ ਹੇਠ ਇੱਕ ਇਨਸਾਨ ਨੇ ਵਾਰ ਕੀਤਾ ਸਾਡੀ ਸੰਗਤ ਤੇ। 7 ਜਾਨਾਂ ਗਈਆਂ। ਕੱਲ ਓਕ ਕ੍ਰੀਕ ਵਿਸਕੌਨਸਿਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਸ ਹਾਦਸੇ ਦੀ ਯਾਦ, ਉਸ ਮੈਸ ਸ਼ੂਟਿੰਗ ਦੀ ਯਾਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਇੱਕ ਸਪੈਸ਼ਲ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ, ਇੱਕ ਵਿਜਲ ਰੱਖਿਆ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਲੋਕਲ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਮੈਂਬਰਸ ਤੇ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਸਿੱਖ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਵੱਲੋਂ ਇਹਨੂੰ ਆਰਗੇਨਾਈਜ਼ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾ ਰਿਹਾ ਹੈ। ਇਸ ਪੂਰਾ ਵੀਕਐਂਡ ਓਕ ਕ੍ਰੀਕ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਾ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਵੱਖ-ਵੱਖ ਫੰਕਸ਼ਨਸ ਹਨ, ਨਾ ਕਿ ਸਿਰਫ ਉਹ ਸ਼ਰਧਾਂਜਲੀ ਦੇਣ ਲਈ, ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਯਾਦ ਕਰਨ ਲਈ ਜੋ ਸਾਡੇ ਤੋਂ ਖੋਹ ਲਏ ਗਏ ਸੀ ਇਸ ਹਾਦਸੇ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਬਟ ਇਸ ਚੀਜ਼ 'ਤੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਸੋਚ ਪਾਉਣ ਲਈ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੋਰ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਇੱਕ ਕਮਿਊਨਿਟੀ ਹੋਣ ਦੇ ਨਾਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਹੋਰ ਕੀ ਕਰ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਚੀਜ਼ ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ, ਸਾਡੇ ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਨਾਲ, ਸਾਡੇ ਬਜ਼ੁਰਗਾਂ ਨਾਲ, ਸਾਡੇ ਗੁਰਦੁਆਰਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਫਿਰ ਨਾ ਵਾਪਰੇ। ਇਸ ਏਰੀਆ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਖਾਸ ਕਰਕੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਦੀ ਗੱਲ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ, ਸਿੱਖ ਕੋalition ਸੰਸਥਾ ਅੱਗੇ ਖੜ ਕੇ ਆਪ ਦਾ ਰੋਲ ਨਿਭਾ ਰਹੀ ਹੈ। ਸਾਡੇ ਨਾਲ ਜੁੜੇ ਹਨ ਸਿਮ ਸਿੰਘ, ਸਿੱਖ ਕੋalition ਤੋਂ, ਸੀਨੀਅਰ ਪਾਲਿਸੀ ਐਂਡ ਐਡਵੋਕੇਸੀ ਮੈਨੇਜਰ। ਸਿਮ, always a pleasure. You're talking a little bit about the last 10 years, Sim, and not just the significance of this anniversary for the Oak Creek shooting, but the significance of everything that came after, whether it's the FBI, inclusion of hate crimes against the Sikh community, or whether it's a ramped up effort from local groups, jathebandiyan, various Sikh community members and organizations to increase our presence and awareness about who we are. So hatred and discrimination are one less reason that people target us. You have to start somewhere. So let's talk a little bit about the policy, specifically when it comes to gun violence, mass shootings. This is a very tricky area in American politics in general, even outside of the Sikh community. When you are putting the Second Amendment, the right to bear arms, and the millions of dollars that the NRA, the National Rifle Association, big gun lobby, is spending to make sure that there is increased and open access to guns, versus ordinary folks like us. People bringing their kids to school, people going to their houses of worship or their supermarket or, a park or a concert, just wanting to feel safe. How does Sikh Coalition fit into all this? Or in general, can you tell us about what work has been done in this area?
I think you raised an important point. As a nation, we can't even have, I think, civil conversations about the issue of gun violence and putting in place reasonable regulations and promoting responsible gun ownership. And that is really challenging. Even for our community, that is a divisive issue. And we recognize at the Sikh Coalition that Sikhs, in our faith, in our history, we teach us to take responsibility against and fight against injustice, both seriously and literally. And given that history and the fact that our community doesn't all share the same political views on any issues, let alone this complex issue, Sikh Americans have a wide-ranging of opinions on gun safety measures and gun ownership in general. And I think this makes it a little bit more complicated to address when, generally the American discourse is not yet ready for this conversation, or even willing to entertain communities like ours, the Jewish community, the Black community, so many communities, minority communities who are impacted by gun violence,
Yes.
that we just are not ready to see this legislation move forward. And at the Sikh Coalition, I think we want to see more reasonable regulations placed on responsible gun ownership. But how we go about doing that requires a lot more soul searching, and it requires a lot more progress in our nation for us to start to see some pathway forward in terms of what we can be doing to protect our communities, and balancing these interests of our constitutional rights and our rights to the Second Amendment, however you believe that it falls within your rights.
I think it's safe to say that this is an ongoing conversation. There is no simple answer or simple solution, certainly not that we can see in the near future. But coming back to Oak Creek, there is a vigil taking place at the Gurdwara Sahib tomorrow. Sikh Coalition, along with other organizations, SALDEF and local organizations, and the Sangat in Oak Creek, has played a huge role in not just putting everything together, but making sure folks know about this. They are turning out. People that can't come out physically to Wisconsin are doing something in their local communities to remember and recognize this tragedy. Sim, I'd love for you to share some information about the vigil tomorrow. I know there's a bunch of other events over the weekend that you guys are also organizing. Please go ahead and let our viewers know what all is happening.
Yeah, as you said, the Sikh Coalition, as well with the Sikh American Legal Education and Defense Fund, SALDEF, and the Interfaith Conference of Greater Milwaukee are assisting the Sikh Temple of Wisconsin with a series of events commemorating the attack. And there will be, on Thursday actually, there will be a series of panel discussions on protecting houses of worship. And as you said, on this Friday, there will be a vigil and speaking program where we'll be joined by the mayor, we'll be joined by Lieutenant Brian Murphy, the governor of Wisconsin, and others who will help commemorate the event. And it's really unfortunate that we are having to do this under such sober circumstances. But this is also a weekend where we want to continue to uplift some of what the community's been doing. So on Saturday, August 6th, there will be a community-focused program, and on Sunday, August 7th, there will be religious services available at the Gurdwara. And all of these events are open to the public for everyone to attend. If they want to visit the website that we are showing on the screen below, you can learn more about the schedule of events. And we're also encouraging and facilitating Sikh communities across the country as they plan a National Day of Seva or a National Night of Vigil events for the weekend of August 5th. And we have more than 20 communities from coast to coast who are participating.
Wow, the solidarity, right? That's really, it's such a positive and inspiring thing to hear. You don't have to physically be in Wisconsin in Oak Creek to make a difference and to get involved in honoring those victims and their legacy on this 10-year anniversary. Sim, what comes next, right? Whether it's from a policy perspective, a community perspective, I'd love to hear some closing thoughts. How do we as a community come together and do more so something like this doesn't happen in the future? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
I think this requires everyone to be civically engaged and involved. Getting out to vote during the midterms is critically important because we need to elect individuals who care about our communities, who want to protect our communities, who will pass legislation that will benefit our communities. And right now, what the Sikh Coalition is promoting is specifically for Congress to take action on 3 pieces of legislation that are in front of them right now at this very moment. One of those pieces of legislation is to pass the Domestic Terrorism Prevention Act. And that would ensure that our government is focusing their resources on addressing white supremacist threats like the one that harmed the community in Oak Creek
Right.
and so many others across the nation from various faiths and races. Secondly, Congress needs to reintroduce and pass the Justice for Victims of Hate Crimes Act. And this would close a loophole in the law that currently keeps the Department of Justice from prosecuting some types of hate crimes. And lastly, we're also asking Congress to pass the Nonprofit Security Grant Improvement Act, which would provide increased funding for federal grants to make it easier for our houses of worship and other institutions to protect themselves from these kinds of threats. There's so much work to be done. I think we want to see more community members get involved, support organizations like ours who are trying to make a difference, who are working with their elected officials at the state and federal level and at the local level. It really requires everyone to care and enact their civic duty of voting.
I could not agree with you more. That is perhaps the most important right that we gain when we become citizens of the United States, the right to vote and exercise our place in this democracy. Sim J. Singh, thank you so much joining us from Sikh Coalition, sharing all of this really important information regarding not just the Oak Creek Vigil taking place tomorrow at the Gurdwara Sahib in Oak Creek, Wisconsin, but in general what we need to do more as a community. Have a good rest of your evening. Good luck this weekend, Sim. Hope to see you back again soon. Sat Sri Akal.
Sat Sri Akal, thank you.
जी इत्थे एक छोटी जी ब्रेक ਲਈ ਰੁਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ ब्रेक ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕੁਝ ਹੋਰ ਸੰਸਥਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਕੱਲ ਦੇ ਵਿਜਲ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਕੱਲ ਦੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਨੂੰ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਓਕ ਕ੍ਰੀਕ ਵਿਸਕੌਨਸਿਨ ਹੋਈ ਸ਼ੂਟਿੰਗ ਦੀ 10 ਸਾਲਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਲਗਿਰਾ ਉਨ ਵਿਕਟਮਸ ਦੀ ਯਾਦ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਪੇਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਰਹਾਂਗੇ